Thanks, guys, for tuning in. It's another episode of Radio Visca. You might have some noise in the background today, so I unfortunately I cannot turn that off. So apologies for that. Today I want to talk a little bit about why being alt-right and simultaneously pro-capitalist is absolutely retarded. So we have to ask ourselves, what does it actually mean to be alt-right? And where does that term come from? And the way I currently understand it, and I think the milieu and the fields where the term was coined and has been used most is around people like Richard Spencer and Jared Taylor in the United States. So we're really talking about white nationalism. Now that's been broadened a little bit, but I think that's where the core movement really originated, and there's of course lots of other aspects to it. So I mean, it's a very amorphous kind of movement, really, and a lot of it's sort of anti-political correctness, anti-multiculturalism, anti-gay propaganda, anti-socialism, anti-gender reassignment, and basically, a lot of it's sort of just a reaction to all the nonsense that's been basically swirling around the toilet bowl of Western civilization. So yes, I realize it's not all. The alt-right does not equal Richard Spencer, and it doesn't equal white nationalism. But really, I think, I think the organization is called the Center for American Renaissance, around Jared Taylor, and people like Richard Spencer. They really are the more intellectual proponents of it. Sure, you have tons of, satirical, sarcastic accounts out there with Pepe the Frog, and there's this sort of online Gamergate poll, 4chan crowd that I think are more involved in the sort of the internet culture war aspect of the alt-right, and was sort of involved in, and I think also steered by certain factions. And I don't know exactly, but I certainly think there's not just Donald Trump against the world. I think this alt-right phenomenon was used by some parts of the deep state in the United States to win the election. There's this whole talk from Steve Pacinic and how the deep state did a counter coup and all this. I don't know how much faith I put in that, but I don't think Donald Trump became president against the entire establishment. That's a bit nonsensical. So sure, the Democrats were obviously against him, and there's various centers of power in the United States. Historically, the CIA and the FBI have not really been on the same page ever, so, that's just one example. And the same probably goes for the NSA and the CIA. Gosh, it depends on the decade you're looking at. It depends on the issue you're looking at, But I'm getting a bit off topic here. Really, what I wanted to talk about is the political, ideology of the alt-right, and really, it's if I was to give it, sort of a few key words, it's anti-multiculturalism. It's the right to an ethnic homelands for ethnic Europeans, whether that is in Europe itself or in the colonies, and anti-immigration, really. So now, somehow, a lot of these people have it in their head that are also pro-capitalism and anti-socialism. And that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, who do you think is behind the migrants? It's the capitalists. I mean, capital wants cheap labor. The capitalistic system is the system importing the migrants. We're not living in a socialist communist era here, right? The communist countries didn't import migrants. I mean, there was a few, Vietnamese comrades who got some education in East Germany or in Hungary or something, but by and large, most of the Eastern European countries were not pulling in large amounts of immigrants during the communist era. I mean, that's totally counter to like worker solidarity, really, right? So what we have to understand is that the alt-right is a ethnically European worker solidarity movement. It's not a pro-capitalist movement. Of course, at the same time, it's also not a communist movement, because communism is inherently international. So, I mean, gosh, I guess there's also probably there's other reasons why there was no mass immigration to communist countries. I mean, there's the inherent authoritarianism of communist countries. So, they can't survive under the influx of masses of people with totally new ideas, right? I mean, North Korea could not survive if there's tons of people moving there telling the North Koreans how terrible it is there. And on top of that, I mean, nobody generally wants to move to a communist country, right? So that's another reason. But, certainly in the West, it's capitalism that's causing the immigration. I mean, let's be clear. It is the requirement of corporations to be competitive and to lower their the cost of labor. It's always been in the interest of corporations to keep labor as cheap as possible, in the interest of capitalists. Now, what do I mean with capitalists? I mean, in a way, really, this is just sort of a modern form of slavery, right? It's the modern slave trade. The ships coming from Africa full of slaves. People have, in the age of propaganda and the internet and the age of public relations and the age of, newspeak, essentially. Nobody's calling it that, but I'm going to call it that. Sure, it's not as direct as it used to be in the age of slavery in the United States. The African was directly put to work on the plantation. No, it's not as direct. It's a more indirect form of, and it's not chattel slavery. It's an indirect form of lowering the wages for everyone. So even if, half of the migrants don't actually get a job, well, there's the other half of the migrants that impoverishing the rest of people through the increased taxation, welfare taxation, and B, you do often see them cleaning the parks, working at McDonald's, doing a lot of sort of jobs that push out the native population out of the labor market. So you have more competition for jobs, which means people are willing to accept lower wages because otherwise they don't get a job at all. So yeah, it's a much more sophisticated system than the modern slavery, but than the old slavery. But I still think that the purpose and the intentions behind it are largely that. There's a much more complicated economy now in the West than there was in 1780. So you have this need for continuous credit growth. You have the need for continuous consumption. You have the need to keep the housing market buoyed and keep basically keep the necessities of life scarce Because when you think about it, when you have a shrinking population, as you did have in the West, well, the parents might have had a holiday house, on the Atlantic coast, and they would have had their normal house in Paris, let's say, right? And then they have one kid. Okay, this kid marries someone whose family also had two houses. So then suddenly, when the parents die, you have a couple who owns four properties, right? For the average citizen, this is great. You want, as the average citizen, you want more stuff per person. That raises you're basically living on the coattails of your forebears, right? Because they built all these cities, they built all the infrastructure, they built all these buildings, and now it's just you and your partner instead of lots of other people who have access to all this. So I'm sure some economist is gonna get at me and say, no, you always need growth, blah blah blah. But I'm pretty sure people in the past didn't have to save for 25 years and go into mortgage debt for 50 years or whatever to own a tiny apartment. So there's something going on there, right? So you get all these alt-right guys, and they're all sort of, influenced by this American civic nationalism and the ethos of American capitalism. And they don't realize capitalism is bringing all these Mexicans in. I mean, what are they doing? They're working on the farms as cheap labor, right? So I find it very funny, and this is where I believe Richard Spencer is absolutely correct. I mean, he says he's not a, classical conservative free market capitalist, and people like RVEP0013 as well. RVEP0013 says, well, socialism, communism, and capitalism, they're both bullshit. So I don't know if this. I mean, it's growing. It's amorphous. The whole right, if you want to even call it that. I mean, that's what the term alt in front of it actually does make sense, because it's almost like, well, this is not the traditional right at all, right? This whole movement, it's rapidly growing, and I believe it's also being infiltrated, it's being used, it's being steered, and then I don't think it's going to stay one coherent movement forever. I think, you already see this sort of splintering into alt-light. Well, then there's the alt-left, I think it's sort of a catchphrase that we'll see change pretty significantly in the next few years, or next few months, for that matter. Yeah. So, what is the best system then for a ethnic nationalist? Someone who basically has the basic fundamental cultural beliefs of the alt-right. What economic system should they support? That's a question for you guys. Leave some comments in the comment field below. Make a video reply. Send me an email. Let me know. Point me to some videos out there that discuss these issues. Because I don't have an answer yet. And I think this is something that's going to emerge with time. And in addition to this whole, all the things I've said before, I also want to encourage people to, don't scoff at Marx, don't scoff at, French postmodernist, post-structuralist authors, and because they're leftists, that's just retarded. First of all, Marx has literally nothing to do with Lenin and Leninism, because he was dead, and I'm pretty sure that Leninism was not what he intended, definitely not Stalinism. And besides, I mean, even if it, it was what he intended, it doesn't mean all of Marx's ideas are totally terrible. I actually disagree with a lot of what he has to say, and from what I've read so far, even, there's a lot of false assumptions in there. But I dislike this anti-intellectual, kind of capitalist, Americanized shutter glasses. This is sort of like tunnel vision where, oh my God, don't touch the evil book of Marx. Don't read that. Yeah. Well, you're just willfully keeping yourself ignorant, then, aren't you? Um, this is all knowledge and important. People had opinions. I don't think Marx was sort of intentionally trying to mislead people into some evil system where he could just laugh, and no, these were his honest thoughts and opinions on the matters of economy and capitalism, and he was simply probably wrong in certain areas. That doesn't mean everything he had to say was wrong. So, yeah, I guess the takeaways from this video today are alt-right cannot equal capitalism. And with capitalism, I don't mean the free market. I'm all for the voluntary exchange of goods. I mean, limiting like that, the way it was under Stalinism and Leninism, is just retarded as well. But capitalism is about central banks or cartel banks issuing capital to the well-connected. So there's an elite that holds the capital, and you and me don't have any access to the capital, right? This is not the free market. I mean, this is one of the big illusions. Yeah, so number one. And then number two, read whatever the hell you want to read and inform yourself on everything. And I do plan to do a video of some of the literature I've read and some of the influences I've had in the future. So, yeah, stay tuned for that. Thanks, guys.